So it's a chance to explore what we've been talking about a little bit all day today, about how the spiritual traditions of the world are really bootstrapping each other, helping each other along, affirming and confirming each other's insights as we move towards a real non-dual reawakening of humanity. So in my final bit today, what I thought I'd like to do, just to try to pull things together a bit where we are, and then maybe leave some time for some questions from the floor as well as from the paper, is to go over a classic piece of the Centering Prayer Contemplative Outreach teaching portfolio, which is the guidelines for doing centering prayer. And people that come to introductory workshops will find on tables which are well organized by well-organized organizers lists of guidelines that are the 4 simple methods. You can also pull these up online. And I think I can paraphrase them carefully enough. I left my guidelines in I gave my book that had the guidelines in it to somebody who we ran out of books where we were selling them back in the States, so I just gave her my book, so I had to do it from memory. But Elizabeth will help me if I forget one. And there are 4. The first one is to choose a sacred word as the symbol of your intention to consent to the presence and action of God. And I'll be back and I'll unpack each one of these in a minute, but I'll give you all 4 so you get oh, you got them! You got it! Oh, blessings. Can you find me the right page? Let's see. I think they would be up here in the putting it all together. It would be where it is.
Cynthia, are we recording you?
Are you? See if you are. Just double check.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. There they are. I'm reading then on page 29 in The Heart of Centering Prayer. Choose a sacred word as the symbol of your willingness to consent to God's action, presence and action within. 2, sitting comfortably and with eyes closed, settle briefly and silently introduce the sacred word as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. 3, when engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. 4, at the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. So I thought I'd pass through each one of these, highlighting some of the points that I've pulled out this morning. First of all, choose a sacred word as the symbol of your willingness to consent to God's presence and action within. Well, we looked a little bit about what consent to God's presence and action within means. In the simplest kind of way, it means to be totally available to what's going to happen in the time that you sit, without expectation, without commentary, without needing to push it around, without needing to make something happen, without evaluating what happens. It's there. The consent word becomes increasingly important as you actually embrace the journey and stabilize a practice of centering prayer, because you'll discover in ways that Thomas describes and has developed beautifully that journey, when you put a regular practice of centering prayer into your day, begins a journey of both spiritual, psychological, and physiological rearrangement, whose final baseline is healing. But as you consent, as you're able, and consent is encapsulated in this "not my will, but thine be done," the constant doing of the practice, your trust will naturally grow stronger and stronger, not only of the process, but I would say of life itself. If I had to give my centering prayer testimony of 40 years of practice now, I would say that's been the strongest difference I've noticed in my life, directly attributable to centering prayer. A growing capacity to trust life. And that doesn't mean to trust in any particular theology. I don't trust life because I know Jesus is my risen Lord. I may know that, but it doesn't increase my capacity to trust life. I trust life because after 40 years of letting go, releasing, that gesture will bring about in a person a gradual rewiring of your attitude towards life, so that instead of going out there like this, you're more willing to let it be, to open, to relax in times of uncertainty without running to control mechanisms, because that's what 40 years of consenting to the presence and action of God, "not my will but thine," will bring about in you. It'll soften your suspicion and your self-protectiveness, even if they're very well established. Now, we talked a little bit about choosing a sacred word. I'd like to say that the sacred word is always a tricky element in centering prayer. That if things are going to go wrong in the prayer, or if you're going to get stuck or off course, it's almost inevitably out of a slight misunderstanding of what the sacred word is or how you use it. So first of all, remember once again that a sacred word is not a mantra. You're not going to repeat it constantly as a touchstone for your attention. It comes into use, and I'll say that exactly that way. It comes into use only in such times as you notice you're engaged with thinking, so that there actually are pauses in the prayer where there's no sacred word being said and there's no thoughts. So it's not a mantra. The other thing that is very important is that it's not all about you. And a lot of people get into trouble by making the sacred word too special. And if you studied, and if you were originally introduced to centering prayer by Basil Pennington, you may have this habit, because he made it quite special. He called it your love word. But it got people to think, when they choose a sacred word, I have to find the most intense, beautiful thing that perfectly matches my soul to be my love word to God. And by the time you've done that, you've laid so much weight on it that it's almost impossible to let it be simple. You've got the story of yourself and your prayer journey too bound up in it. Thomas emphasizes the word should be neutral. The Cloud of Unknowing just says it should be a word that's comfortable to you, that it doesn't touch off a lot of negative feedback. It's not a word that makes you react, but it doesn't touch off a lot of positive either. Because if I'm saying my special little word, I'm sending this love bouquet to God, you're going to be stuck right in your usual sense of yourself. And your prayer is going to tend to become possessive and precious no matter what you do. One of my favorite Thomas Keating stories, and I don't know whether it translates into the UK, because I haven't been shopping lately and seeing what's available on the cereal shelves besides the muesli. But in the United States, we have this cereal called Cheerios. Do they have them here? You know, the little oats that are made in the shape of the O that are usually now the first solid food that you give your babies. But Thomas tells the story of, again, from one of the early days when he was doing his centering prayer teaching personally, and he was going through this list of words that you could use to be your sacred word, and he was talking about the God words and said sometimes in a foreign language, and he said you could use like Abba or Spirit or Kyrie or Pax, and this sort of hard of hearing fellow was down in the first row, and he smiled when that part was done, and he fell immediately into his centering prayer. And then at the end, when they had the sharing, he said, Father Thomas, I sure love that sacred word. I just sat there saying, Cheerios, Cheerios, Cheerios. So Thomas emphasizes it's your intention that makes the word sacred. And I would say, then, and I'll get back to this when we get to point 3, that the way the word really works is it's like a little piece of red string tied around your finger that reminds you to do something. And what happens is that the word or the short phrase that you change, you say, yes, this will be my word that signifies my willingness. When I catch myself thinking, to let it go. What happens is it begins to go into your unconscious. And very often, although it may sound like in the instructions, you become aware that you're thinking, and then you use your centering prayer, like turning on your windshield wiper to wash it off. In point of fact, what's actually happening is the reverse. That thing in your subconscious, that inner watcher that's always watching with you, notices your thinking and pops you up the word. So that very frequently, your awareness that you're thinking comes simultaneously with the word being right there. So a lot of the work in centering prayer is done this way. It's a trigger in your unconscious and to your unconscious to remind yourself that you're thinking and invite you to promptly let the thought go. That's all it is. Any more weight laid upon it, any kind of making of it too special, any kind of concentrating on it, or using it to replace a thought that you've deemed unacceptable, is going to stick you in your head. Is going to stick you worrying about, well, is this the right word? Do I need to use it now? Does the situation warrant my using my word? Or is it, just let it be. Choose your word as your intent. Trust that it will go into your unconscious. The smallest and lightest and emotionally neutral word or short phrase you can find is what you want. That's what will do the job. Okay? And again, that instruction comes right out of the Cloud of Unknowing. So the second guideline then is sitting comfortably and with eyes closed, settle briefly, and silently introduce the sacred word. Well, the first instructions really have to do with embodiment. Sitting comfortably in your body. And at first, there was a tendency, and Thomas Keating stressed and continued to stress, being a good monk, that the purpose in centering prayer, what you really want to do is to make your body neutral. I think that's a monastic point of view on it. I think that what we would say, 20 years further down the pike, and in an era which increasingly recognizes the importance of embodiment practices, what we want to do is to encourage our body to be a full participant in the sacred act of meditation, to carry us comfortably and in its own way to contribute its bodily wisdom to the depth of the experience. You all saw how beautifully things came together when we chatted together and did those sacred gestures. There's something in the language of great devotion that the body gets better than anything else. It is your friend in this. And when the energies of prayer begin to rise, and when that deeper attention of the heart begins to arise, it arises in the body. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite one-liners from Eckhart Tolle is, he says, nobody gets enlightened apart from the body. So, and I really believe that this is on our plate in the 21st century, that as we receive contemplative practice in Christianity from a predominantly monastic and celibate tradition and try and translate it out into a world with an increasing recognition of embodiment, and in a world that's largely not celibate, we're going to understand different nuances of how the body really does support the work of prayer. And I think it's lay wisdom to give back to the tradition. So I'm sure we'll see this work. People ask, why do you close your eyes? Well, the general rule given, the guideline given, is because this is a prayer where we're not encouraging a lot of stimulation with the outside world, which would tend to pull our attention outward. But common sense obtains. If you find yourself falling asleep in the prayer, and you don't want to, if you bring your eye to that kind of classic Buddhist soft focus, which means your eyes are open and kind of looking neutrally at something about 2 or 3 feet out ahead of you and slightly below you, you'll wake up, and you'll come right back into yourself. So in all things, if you remember the objective, which is just to decrease interference from the outer world in this particular practice, because we're working on a different kind of practice, not mental alertness, but self-giving. So that's why eyes closed is the norm. But unless you want to fall asleep in prayer, let your eyes be as they must be to let you stay awake during the time. And this silently introducing the word means that at first most people will start by gently, lightly, under their breath, silently saying their word. And then something happens, and you find that you've gone through a tunnel and you emerge at point 3. When engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. Well, you may at this point want to pull your hair out, because the instruction that you most want is missing there. How do I know it's okay to drop the sacred word? And people have really lamented about that, and there was about 10 years where people struggled actively to find the right instruction to tell people how to do that. And there is no right instruction. So finally and properly they gave up. What happens is there is no moment when you decide to drop out the sacred word. There is no moment when you say, oh, fine, I've accessed a state of peace and consciousness and no thinking, so I think I'll let the word go. It doesn't happen like that. I once used in my first book a butchered French phrase. I said, the word il se drop. It drops itself out. And what you have to factor in, it's very much like you don't see the moment you fall asleep. It just happens. And in centering prayer, the most underappreciated friend we have in doing this practice is actually the active cooperation of our unconscious. or what you might call it there, your deeper unconscious. That it's amazing that all you have to do is sit down and in some sane moment decide, yeah, I want to do this prayer. For 20 minutes I'll consent to the presence and action of God. When I catch myself thinking, I'll let the thought go. Boom! Guaranteed, at least once, something will quietly, you're thinking, and it will usually do that in the form of your sacred word comes up, and you'll say, just thinking. Something is helping us in this prayer. That's why you don't have to stress yourself out about when is it okay to let the sacred word go. It will drop itself out and it will bring itself back. All you have to do is to contribute your willingness to let that happen. Your willingness when you catch yourself thinking to let the thought go. And every time you're willing to do this deal, your intention strengthens. I would own straight out that people who are learning centering prayer spend more time initially in daydreaming than is acceptable in most of the more concentrative methods of meditation. You know, that's why I'll start people typically with concentrative methods of meditation, because all the work of keeping your mind on your thought, on your mantra, on your breath, kind of militates against daydreaming. The centering prayer is willing to take the operational risk. There are times when you're not clear, you're not sharp, you're not doing something. They'll take that hazard as part of the acceptable risk that something is going to remind you, and from your pure intention, you're going to let it go. And every time that happens, your intention firms up. And when your intention is really, really firm and really, really present, you can pretty well hold a period of centering prayer in deep spiritual attentiveness from the sheer power of your intention. And the thing is so delicious and so sweet and so fundamentally different in quality from a single point focus held by straight up attention that if you have a taste for it, you never go back again. The sweetness of what it's like to hold attention of the heart from pure inner attention is extraordinarily tender, intimate, delicious, nonviolent, and totally sharp. And so that's what we aspire to in this prayer if it's to come. And we're gentle with ourselves. That's why the instructions about, don't shoot down your thoughts, don't use your sacred word as a battering ram to keep thoughts from coming. Let them come! Because you're going to find that something deeper in you will eventually, keep an attentiveness in which authentic quiet enters from deeper within. Beautiful. And of course, just so I don't send you all out of here with false advertising, that happens most of the time. And in general, in centering prayer, there's this general progression that as you move along in the outer world, your willingness increases, your flexibility, your gentleness with life, your trustingness. That's the tendency. And in general, in the inner life, over time, while thoughts come and go, you recognize quickly, you stabilize more quickly, you let go more quickly, you hold your intentionality from a deeper place. General pattern. But as Thomas has pointed out in his whole beautiful, complex teaching on the journey of purification called the divine therapy, there are times when because of events in either outer or inner life, we can feel destabilized, where stuff gets torn loose in our unconscious, where we're working through trauma at an unconscious level. And sometimes those periods will not be peaceful at all. But still the instruction maintains, let it go, let it go, let it go. Because these are phases, and they happen in the prayer life. So if you find that you've been doing what you think is a really good job in centering prayer, and all of a sudden you're upset and agitated for a while, not to worry. There's a whole teaching that talks about this that I can't go into in the last few minutes of time together here, but says this is all perfectly normal in the process of the purification and deepening of the soul. What I would leave you with more than anything else is just this assurance that for me the most remarkable discovery in the whole thing has had nothing to do with whether I can control my thoughts and not think so much or hold a different attentiveness. It's the actual delighted discovery that something helps. You know, that you're able, that something engages, something from the unconscious or something from a deeper willingness, or the Holy Spirit is with us as we do the prayer, to call our attention to the thinking, to call us back. What makes you notice your thinking? Something is working in our behalf. And one of the things that's most beautiful in centering prayer has been the discovery over the years of a message that I think I was destined to share in Liverpool. You'll never walk alone. But that gradual trust in the divine friend is, I think, what the prayer is really helping. And you can language that any way you want. Your higher self, the inner spirit, your subconscious, your essential self, you aren't alone. That every current of God's love sets in the direction of your evolution. And don't ever forget it. Okay. Finally, at the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with eyes closed for a couple of minutes. Please do this from the inside, not from the outside. The whole idea there is that it helps if you make a conscious transition between your time of sitting in meditation and your time of getting up and moving about your life. To say, I have done this activity called meditation, thank you. Now I get myself up and move into the day. It makes a huge difference in what you're able to carry with you of the fruits, shared and gained on the meditation cushion into daily life. And a lot of people, we were seeing the bell would ring, you bolt up, gather up your gear, or jump into your journal and start writing for all you're worth. In other words, you jump right back into your usual ego self with all its worries. And so it's like they're two parallel tracks and they don't speak to each other. So that time of lingering on the cushion it designates the time needed to move thoughtfully and consciously from this one sphere of consciousness to another, to get used to it, to move out with a firm intention to carry into daily life the fruits that have been shared on this cushion. The reason I say don't do it outwardly is that I've watched it nowadays, sometimes in contemplative outreach groups, turn into this sort of mini ritual. People have been sitting there for, a couple of meditation periods. The bell rings, somebody's dying to go to the loo, but everybody's still just sitting there, and you watch them writhing around, and it's not achieving the effect from the outside. If it's just done as a sort of obligatory piety, you know, you might as well not do it. And I don't really believe that you need to do that because you're in an altered state of consciousness and have to come back. The kind of consciousness we're talking about is clear and sharp. It comes back instantly without disruption if you bring a sense of strength and hospitality to it. It's really, the time is for making sure you go forward in that strength and hospitality, okay? So that's the reasoning behind that thinking, so you just don't go back on automatic pilot, okay? Anyway, I think those guidelines are still extraordinary, excellent ways of allowing us to review the practice of the prayer, find some guidelines, and hopefully you can weigh your own experience of the prayer against them from time to time and your experience of this day. So we have a little bit of time for some questions. And how do you want to work this, Mark? You're going to give people the mic as they come up?
I was going to suggest that if you've got a question, you might come over here and take the microphone. And if you want to come to comment on another question, we'll do it that way.
I just wanted to, can you hear me? Ask you about the use of the mantra. Because I belong to the World Community for Christian Meditation, the John Maynard Freedom Tradition. And from over 30 years of meditating, I would say that we all, through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, through a path of deep love, through coming into the consciousness of Christ, taking on the mind of Christ, that we all, whether we use a mantra or whether we use centering prayer, we all come to the same place.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. When you consider the relationship between centering prayer and Christian meditation, I think the tendency has often been in the name of harmony between meditation practices to underemphasize the initial difference. The initial difference is pretty great. It's not just a matter that the saying the mantra consistently until finally down the pike it drops out is a different instruction from the discrete, as we've called it, C-R-E-T-E use of it, used in centering prayer. They're working on different bits. The Christian meditation belongs to an absolutely classic universal school of meditation. You can't go wrong with it. It's an extraordinary, stable practice. Centering prayer is more innovative and experimental in the beginning with the letting go. It's working on the surrender piece a lot more directly. But they both, as you say, do come around. It's like going around the compass in either direction, and they meet in the middle in the deepening love of Christ. And I think it's that essential commonality that we really need to share when we talk about the fact that these two paths of meditation were great gifts given us by God to get Christianity back in the ball game, and that what we really need to be doing is celebrating, exalting, and deeply respecting each other's methodologies and each other's cultures within an overall goal of awakening the heart of Christ. So thank you for your words. Okay.
Cynthia, you've been using with us today 4 gestures, the letting go kinetic gesture and the 3 in the chart. I believe that these gestures are not simply more or less arbitrary waving around as the mood takes us, but there are some objective, as it were, patterns for them. Is there any way we can find out a little bit more about these gestures and what other gestures and their significance might be?
Yeah, there are there are whole bodies of religious wisdom and lineage that understand, as you correctly say, the objective nature of sacred gesture. And from the study of the mudras in Buddhism and Hinduism to just understanding that, yes, indeed, that these gestures convey objective spiritual information in a feelingful way. The problem is that Christianity, by and large, never articulated that language and that information in a phenomenological way. It does it in a theological way. But for me, the very, very best place where we really understand the objective nature of sacred gesture is the wonderful teaching on this that's strewn throughout the Gurdjieff work. And G.I. Gurdjieff, that great spiritual teacher, essentially went and studied a universal repertory of sacred gestures and exactly the spiritual information that's conveyed in them as being a vessel that contains spiritual truth, just like mythology and poetry. And as people actually learn the movements and learn to take these positions accurately, they come in touch with the inner teaching. His work develops the theology and phenomenology of it better than anything I know. So that's where I would recommend you work if you can find your way into the starting of it.
Thank you. Could I squeeze you just a little bit more? Suppose I get to sit down, and I get out my smartphone, and I go to Amazon. What would you recommend on that?
Oh my goodness. Well, you could, the word, I don't know whether Amazon is smart enough to pick this one up, but the word that Gurdjieff used to talk about a gesture, a ritual, or a mandala, or any kind of spiritual iconography, whether in the body or on paper, that conveyed objective spiritual truth. He used the word legomanism. And if you start with Lego, the kids' toys, L-E-G-E-O, and then put minism in, if it can give you that, it'll give you that. Otherwise, just pick up P.D. Uspensky's book, In Search of the Miraculous, and read from what he has to say about that. And that'll get you started.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. The things I get called on to answer in question and answer, particularly listening to Liverpool English. Yes?
Cynthia, this is about CAC and the online courses.
Yeah.
Is there any centre or group? I know there is contemplative outreach to branches in the UK, but is there any education centre or group that you are allied to, or that you do any teaching out, or people do teaching on yours and father laws?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much of it, you drown in it.
In the UK?
Well, I mean, if you want online stuff, yeah. But the actual physical embodiment of it. Around the UK, with regard to Richard Rohr's The CAC and the Living School material, there's a growing body of alumni that have been, that are in various degrees active in maintaining their groups and their sessions and passing it on. I don't think there's any place that's on the line distributing and running a set curriculum. We've talked about that a little bit, but there's not the person power. There are centers around the UK that have been long-time strongholds of Richard Rohr teaching, and I can't remember them off the top of my head. Mark, do you know some of them? Yeah, great.
I'm just going to say that we're hoping to set up a weekly group here in Liverpool, which is not just going to be practicing something rare, but actually I'm hoping it's going to be a gathering where we can begin to go much more deeply into this wisdom tradition and start really exploring the practices. Yeah.
Great. I think that a very optimal situation at this point, given technology as it is and this wonderful set of courses, is the capacity to create on-the-ground groups to work together through some very, very wonderful online material and to read and study and direct. The CAC has just sort of taken over by my introductory wisdom schools that we've done with groups in the States, and is moving this so it will very quickly become something that can be done with groups in group study. And so all sorts of sessions are out there, and it very much is the wave of the future. But the critical mass that can be attained by groups working together under leadership and doing prayer in a room together is, I still think, unparalleled. So aid in the manifesting of it here.
It's just a quick question. Can you use a sacred gesture? Like an actual movement of the hands, or does it have to be word?
Yeah, what's that about? I didn't hear all that about justice. What about it?
Sorry, no. Can you use, during your centering prayer, can you use a sacred gesture?
Oh, the gesture. Oh, yeah. That not during the time of centering prayer itself, because it's too outward. But I think it's very good practice to do. As you're waiting for a bus, or as you're walking and doing meditative walking or anything, the more you actually practice with this gesture around the house, the more it helps you to go into your body and understand that that's what you're doing in centering prayer. You're actually doing it in centering prayer, but in a much more subtle level of your body being when you're doing it. So do play with it on the outside when you're walking the dog and any other places, and see what it does on the inside. Good question. Thank you. Hi.
I don't know if you said that I've read all of the Cloud of Unknowing, because I haven't. But I was wondering if I get the impression there's a kind of relationship between the concept of unknowing and the Cloud of Unknowing, and the letting go and the not attending to focal points.
Yep.
So I was wondering if you could kind of go into that a bit more, just briefly.
Yeah. I think that when the author of the Cloud of Unknowing is talking about and using this core metaphor of the Cloud of Unknowing, he's specifically using it to describe the state of objectless awareness. And you can imagine how challenging this is for a fellow who's writing in the 14th century in a language which is only at that point taking shape. This is the century that English, as we know now it as a language, came together out of 3 different linguistic streams. So he's got a brand new language, he's got a heavily Latin scholastic theology, and he's got this experience he's learned in meditation of something that, he's learned that when you put your attentions on objects, it somehow gets in the way of a greater knowingness that's known when you don't do that. So I try to take that apart in my Heart of Centering prayer book, but there's a place where he uses an image that's just brilliantly telling. He talks about how he says any thought you have, and he uses the word thought in the same way we're using it in centering prayer, is between you and your God, which means it comes between it separates you. And he says it's the same way as that when an archer is about to shoot, his attention is entirely on the bullseye, and for the moment there's nothing else. And so he sort of says when your attention gets fixed like an archer on the target, subject object to a thought, all of a sudden you can't perceive God anymore, that can only be perceived in this indirect knowingness. And it's a brilliant insight, and it's amazing that in 600 years since the cloud has been in existence, people still are not figuring that out. And I think it's largely because the commentators on the Cloud are still working from such Western theological categorical points of view that they don't understand that he's describing a phenomenological state, which is well known in the other traditions. So thank you for that observation.
Thank you very much for those questions. It's 4 o'clock, so we ought to draw to a close. Tomorrow's Gospel reading in the morning for the Church of England is one of those wonderful stories when Jesus enables, as talked about, enabling disciples to pull in a huge catch of fish. And for me, those wonderful stories, different versions of them, are a good invitation to us to put out into the deep. And actually to find the treasures that are there, that beneath the surface of what we usually accept as our lives. And today, Cynthia, I think, certainly for myself, you enabled us to put out into the deep. I think you've done that through what you said. I think you've done it very powerfully through how you said it. And that's one of the questions that was now suggested. You've also done it with lots of gestures. You've done it bodily. So for me, you've embodied it as well. And I think you set the title today, it was from performance to gift. And I think you've done that splendidly. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if I can, I'd like to return the thanks to you. I'm stunned, frankly, and deeply honored that so many of you should come from so many parts and give a day to this fine level of attention and the brilliant level of quiet and willingness that you brought to this. I think this speaks profoundly about the yearning and intention in this part of the world and the state of the human heart, actually, despite what everybody likes to say about it. I'm very honored. Mark, thank you and your team for the work in organizing it, honoring Elizabeth, who has brought contemplative outreach and centering prayer into the UK in a powerful way many, many decades ago through her close personal friendship with Thomas Keating, and has been an organizer and an ama of centering outreach work for however long. Thank you for all who make this gift go on into the next generation. I hope to see some of you tomorrow at one or the other of the services, and we'll be talking a little bit more on Monday night at a talk I give at St. Bride's that'll cover some of this distant stuff we've talked about today, but with a new spin and perhaps a different audience. So wherever I see you, I've seen you now, and my day is richer for it. Thank you. Godspeed.